In 2001, two scientists published a paper that turned a quiet volcanic island into a doomsday weapon. A weapon aimed directly at the United States. Right now, on the island of La Palma in the Canary Islands, the western flank of an active volcano named Cumbre Vieja is fractured. The theory was simple and apocalyptic. A future eruption could detach a piece of the island the size of a city, sending it sliding into the Atlantic Ocean in one single monolithic block. It would create a wave traveling at the speed of a jetliner, a mega-tsunami that would cross the Atlantic in just 6 to 9 hours and slam into the east coast of the United States. New York, Boston, Miami, every major city a target. The initial models predicted waves up to 82 feet high, penetrating miles inland. A catastrophe on a scale the modern world has never witnessed. It's a scenario that feels pure Hollywood. So tell me in the comments, had you ever heard of this threat before today? I read a lot of them. For 2 decades, this hypothesis has lurked in the public imagination, a terrifying possibility that refuses to die. But here's the problem with the theory. The vast majority of the scientific community says it's wrong, not just slightly wrong, fundamentally, physically, wrong, a ghost story that got out of hand. And in 2021, the volcano itself would put that story to the ultimate test. An insane number of you who watch these videos, sometimes for hours, forget to subscribe. We're a small team, and every single sub is a signal for us to keep digging into stories just like this one. If you get any value from this, take 2 seconds and hit that button. It is the single most important thing you can do to support the channel. Let's begin. The story of the Mega-Tsunami begins not with a computer model, but with a crack in the earth. The date was June 24th, 1949. The volcano on La Palma, known as Cumbre Vieja, or the Old Peak, rumbled to life. The San Juan eruption began, tearing open new vents and spewing lava. But something else was happening. Something far more unsettling. Along a 2.5-kilometer line running down the volcano's western flank, the ground itself split open. A fault system appeared where none had existed before. And the entire western side of the mountain dropped, not by inches, by several meters. It was a stark, visible wound on the face of the island, a geological scar that announced a profound structural weakness. The western flank of Cumbre Vieja was, in a measurable way, detaching from the rest of the island. For geologists, this was a fascinating, but not entirely surprising event. Oceanic volcanoes are dynamic, constantly building and destroying themselves. But for 2 specific scientists decades later, that 1949 crack was the smoking gun, the starting point for an almost unthinkable chain of events. Those scientists were Dr. Stephen Ward at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Dr. Simon Day at University College London. In September of 2001, they published their findings in the journal Geophysical Research Letters. Their paper wasn't a warning about an eruption, it was a warning about what came next. They argued that the 1949 event had primed the volcano for a catastrophic lateral collapse. Their model was terrifyingly direct, inside the volcano. Magma and superheated groundwater would build up during a future eruption, acting like a pressurized wedge. This pressure wouldn't just cause a lava flow, it would exploit the weakness of that 1949 fault line, shoving the entire western flank outwards. The model didn't predict a series of small landslides, it predicted a single, colossal failure. A block of rock between 150 and 500 cubic kilometers in volume sliding into the ocean at over 100 meters per second. That's more than 220 miles per hour. The energy release, they calculated, would be equivalent to the entire electrical consumption of the United States for half a year. Unleashed in a matter of minutes. The result of this colossal splash would be an initial water dome almost 900 meters high, nearly 3,000 feet, taller than any skyscraper on Earth, a mountain of water rising from the ocean. That dome would then collapse, radiating outwards as a mega-tsunami. The numbers were staggering, and they got the world's attention. The wave would race across the Atlantic at 800 kilometers per hour. It would strike the coast of West Africa in an hour. It would reach the shores of the Americas in 6 to 9 hours, with waves still towering between 10 and 25 meters high. That's up to 82 feet. A wall of water that would not just flood coastlines, but would surge miles inland, obliterating everything in its path. It's a single crack, a single moment of geological weakness. What do you think? Was this the smoking gun the scientists claimed, or just a normal part of a volcano's life? Let me know. The Ward & Day paper was a media sensation. It was visual, it was immediate, and it was aimed at one of the most populated coastlines on the planet. The story wrote itself. A ticking time bomb in the Atlantic. A volcanic doomsday clock counting down to zero. The hypothesis became a staple of disaster documentaries, a recurring headline every time Cumbre Vieja showed the slightest sign of activity. It had all the elements of a perfect threat, a specific place, a plausible mechanism, and a devastatingly clear outcome. The 1949 crack was the proof, the computer model was the prediction, and the silence from the volcano was just the quiet before the storm. The question was no longer if it would happen, but when. Except that was never the right question. Almost immediately after the paper was published, the global scientific community pushed back. Hard, not with opinion, but with physics. The problem wasn't that volcanic islands don't collapse. They do. The geological record is full of them. The 1888 collapse of Ritter Island in Papua New Guinea is a classic example. The problem was how they collapse. Dr. George Pararas Karayanis, a renowned tsunami expert and former director of the International Tsunami Information Center, was one of the first and most vocal critics. In 2002, he published a detailed refutation. He argued that the Ward & Day model made a fundamental, catastrophic error. It assumed the entire flank would fail at once. A monolithic slide. But that's not how mountains fall apart. Pararas Karayanis and many others argued that flank collapses are almost always piecemeal. They happen in dozens or hundreds of smaller sequential events. Not one giant block, but a cascade of smaller slides, often separated by hours, days, or even centuries. This single difference changes everything. A series of smaller slides displaces far less water. It generates a series of smaller, localized tsunamis. Dangerous for nearby islands, perhaps, but not a single, ocean-spanning mega-tsunami. The energy is spread out over time. The apocalypse becomes a series of bad days, not a single civilization-ending moment. It's a terrifying prediction. If you find this breakdown valuable, help us get it in front of more people by hitting the like button. And if you have family on the East Coast, share this with them. The real story isn't the one playing out in disaster movies. Then there was the problem of the wave itself. The image of a 3,000-foot wall of water in the Canary Islands, translating to an 80-foot wave in New York, ignores one of the most basic principles of physics, radial spreading. Think of dropping a huge stone into the center of a perfectly still pond. The splash is biggest at the point of impact. But as the ripples travel outwards, they lose energy and height with every inch they travel. The Atlantic Ocean is a very, very large pond. Over the 3,500 miles to the U.S. East Coast, the wave's energy would decay exponentially. Furthermore, the shallow continental shelf of North America acts as a massive break, absorbing and disrupting the wave's power long before it ever reaches the shore. The tsunami wouldn't arrive as a clean, towering wall of water. It would arrive as a disorganized, chaotic surge, significantly smaller than the doomsday models predicted. The Instituto Volcanologico de Canarias, or INVOLCAN, the people who monitor Cumbre Vieja every single day, officially dismissed the hypothesis. Their statement was blunt: Cumbre Vieja is stable. Spanish volcanologist Joan Mart, when pressed by the media, put it perfectly: it is possible, but it is not likely. So you have two competing stories. One, a dramatic, easy-to-understand narrative of singular, apocalyptic collapse. The other, a more complex, nuanced reality of piecemeal failures and wave mechanics. For 20 years, these two stories existed in parallel. The public imagination held on to one. The scientific community insisted on the other. All that was needed was a real-world test. And in 2021, they got one. On September 19th, 2021, after a week of intense seismic swarms, thousands of small earthquakes shaking the island, the ground in a forested area called Cabeza de Vaca ripped open. The Cumbre Vieja Volcano, was erupting for the first time in 50 years. This wasn't a minor event. This was the most powerful and destructive eruption on the island of La Palma in recorded history. For 85 straight days, the volcano, now officially named Tajogite by locals, bled lava. Fissures opened, spitting fountains of molten rock hundreds of feet into the air. Rivers of lava, glowing red and black, crawled toward the coast, consuming everything. Homes, schools, farms, and roads were erased. Over 7,000 people were evacuated. The damage would eventually be calculated at over 843 million euros. The eruption was a genuine catastrophe for the people of La Palma, but for volcanologists around the world, it was something else. It was the ultimate stress test of the Mega-Tsunami hypothesis. This was it. Magma was moving. The ground was shaking violently. The volcano was under immense pressure. If there was ever a moment for the western flank to give way, this was it. Every disaster movie script written over the past 2 decades was now playing out in real time. The U.S. National Tsunami Warning Center monitored the situation with extreme prejudice. News outlets around the globe recycled the old headlines, asking the same question, is this the big one? And the volcano gave its answer. Day after day, for 85 days. The lava flows were relentless. They reached the ocean, creating huge plumes of steam and toxic gas, and building massive new peninsulas of land, called fajanas. The volcano wasn't just destroying the island. It was actively expanding it, adding over 2,500 acres of new territory. The ground shook, the mountain roared, the flank held. It didn't move. It didn't slip. It didn't collapse. There was no landslide. There was no water dome. There was no mega-tsunami. Zero, the U.S. National Tsunami Warning Center, issued a statement confirming there was absolutely no tsunami hazard to the East Coast. The 2021 eruption, the most powerful event to strike the volcano in centuries, had served as a live, full-scale experiment. And the result was clear. The scientific consensus had been right all along. The flank was stable. The monolithic collapse model was wrong. And if this is the kind of deep dive analysis you can't find anywhere else, this is probably your second reminder to subscribe. I know. But it genuinely keeps the lights on around here. The story should have ended there. A popular but flawed theory is tested by reality and proven incorrect. Science advances. But that's not how stories work in the 21st century. In late 2024, a new Norwegian drama series called La Palma hit Netflix. The plot? A fictionalized, high-budget dramatization of the Cumbre Vieja mega-tsunami hypothesis. The show was a hit, and it ignited a brand new wave of public panic. Google searches for La Palma tsunami skyrocketed. Social media filled with terrified questions. Geologists and volcanologists found themselves, once again, forced to publicly debunk a theory that a real-world eruption had already disproven. Dr. Janine Krippner, a physical volcanologist, took to social media to patiently explain, for the 1,000th time, why the show's premise was fictional. She pointed to the piecemeal collapse model. She referenced the 2021 eruption. She cited the consensus from Volcano. But a good story is always more powerful than a nuanced fact. The myth of the mega-tsunami, it turned out, was more resilient than the volcano itself. So where does that leave us? The volcano, Cumbre Vieja, is still active. Flank collapses on volcanic islands are a real geological phenomenon, happening on timescales of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. The probability of a massive collapse in the Canary Islands is estimated at roughly once every 100,000 years. Even Dr. Frank Ward, one of the original authors of the 2001 paper, noted in 2005, let's not scare people. Even when there is an eruption, the probability of collapse is low. The imminent threat, the ticking time bomb, was never real. It was the product of a specific worst-case computer model that the scientific community has since demonstrated is not an accurate reflection of our planet's physics. The real story of Cumbre Vieja is not about a wave that could destroy New York. It's about the power of an idea. It's a story of how a single scientific paper, amplified by the media and cemented by pop culture, can create a reality all its own. A reality more compelling and far more terrifying than the truth. The volcano did not produce a tsunami. But the idea of one has been sending waves across the world for over 20 years, and those waves show no sign of stopping. We're almost at the end of the story. And if you've made it this far, you're clearly one of us. So for the last time, make sure you're subscribed. We have a lot more stories like this to tell, and we can't do it without you. The danger was never the wave. It was the story. A story that mistook a possibility for a probability, and a worst-case model for a certain future. The 2021 eruption gave us a rare gift, a definitive, real-world answer. It showed us a mountain under extreme duress that refused to break in the way the disaster narrative demanded. It was not a Hollywood ending. It was a geological one. Slow, complex, and far less theatrical. But for the millions of people living on the other side of the Atlantic, it was the best possible outcome. The volcano is still there. The crack from 1949 is still visible. But the Mega-Tsunami remains where it has always been. A ghost in the machine, a ripple in a